On the planet Alvora, the skies were a deep shade of purple, with streaks of orange and gold as the two moons hung low on the horizon. The air was thick with the scent of exotic flowers, and the faint hum of the planet's ancient energy fields, a calm serenity, enveloped the land. But beneath the beauty, there was a growing sense of dread. The once proud Alvorans, a race known for their intelligence and philosophical advancements, had been rejected by the galaxy, and now they were isolated on their world without allies or the resources to survive for much longer. In the grand central hall of the city of Sirius, the Alvoran leaders gathered in a silent meeting room. The air was thick with tension as they looked at the holographic displays, showing the many empires that had denied them entry into the Galactic Federation year after year. Their requests for alliance had been met with disdain or ignored entirely. The rejection had been so absolute it felt like a slap to their dignity, their sense of purpose. The Alvorans had always prided themselves on their knowledge and wisdom, but now that was nothing compared to the cold indifference of the galactic powers. Vera sat at the back of the room. She was young compared to the other leaders and still had much to learn, but she felt the weight of her people's despair more acutely than most others. She had been in the council meetings where they discussed their plight, their inability to protect themselves or expand their knowledge beyond the boundaries of their homeworld. They were powerless in the eyes of the galaxy, not because they lacked intelligence, but because they lacked military might or the technology to back their claims of worthiness. As the older Alvoran leaders debated the next step in their survival strategy, Vera's mind wandered, her thoughts not entirely on the discussions before her, but on something else. She had been working on a project for weeks now. In secrecy, she had discovered something unexpected buried deep within the archives of ancient Alvoran records. It was an old transmission, one that had been sent from a distant world her people had not known of before. It was faint, but it was clear enough to make her pause and wonder if there was something out there, something beyond the cruelty of galactic indifference. The transmission had been from Earth, a young world in a distant galaxy filled with a race of beings called humans. From what little Vira had uncovered about them, they were unlike anything the Alvorans had ever seen. Humans were not technologically advanced compared to other galactic species, but they had a strange and unique ability. They were resilient. They survived under harsh conditions. They adapted. They fought for what they believed in despite having no large military or powerful alliances. What they lacked in power, they made up for in sheer determination. Vira had spent countless hours studying their history, learning about their struggles, their wars, their survival through adversity. She had never seen a species like them. They were fragile yet strong, capable of making mistakes, but learning from them, growing stronger with each challenge they faced. The more she learned, the more she began to believe that these humans were not weak at all. They were different from the galaxy's established powers, but in their own way they were stronger. She had a thought, an idea that made her heart race. Could the humans be the answer to the Alvorans' desperate situation? What if they could form an alliance with humans? What if the resilience of the human race could complement the wisdom of the Alvorans? Together, they might have a chance to survive in this vast galaxy, where only the strong seemed to matter. It was a long shot, but it was the only hope they had left. Vira stood up quietly and left the room. She needed time to think and time to plan. The idea she had was risky and uncertain, but it was better than sitting in the council room with no solutions, nothing but the feeling of inevitable doom. She had to find a way to reach out to the humans. She had to find a way to make them see the potential of the Alvorans. She had to make them believe there was something worth saving. The weight of her decision was immense, but as she walked through the hallways of the council chambers, her steps were filled with purpose for the first time in a long while. She felt hope. It was faint, but it was there, and for her people, hope was the only thing that could save them now. Vira sat in her small laboratory overlooking the vast fields of Alvora. The sun had set, and the cool breeze swept through the open windows, carrying the scent of fresh rain. She had been working for days on her plan to reach out to the humans. Her fingers drummed nervously on the console as she reviewed the data one last time. The ancient transmission from Earth had been a spark in the dark, a spark that she now needed to fan into a fire if her people were to have any chance of survival. The transmission was old and fragmented, but the patterns were clear enough to identify its origin: Earth, a planet in a far distant galaxy, with a species called human. She had spent hours analyzing every scrap of information she could find. She had read stories of their history, their struggles, and their triumphs, and she was struck by one thing above all else: their capacity for resilience. It was unlike anything she had ever seen in the galactic records. The humans had survived wars, natural disasters, disease, and famine, and yet they remained stubbornly alive and thriving against all odds. Vira's fingers hovered over the console. She knew what she had to do, but it was a risky move to send a message to a species that might not even understand them, or worse, might see them as weak. The Alvorans had been rejected by the greater galactic powers for their lack of strength, and now she was about to risk everything on a species that had no reason to help them. She paused for a moment, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on her shoulders. But the more she thought about it, the more she knew this was the only option, the only hope for her people. Her plan was simple but delicate. She would send a message to Earth offering what little the Alvorans had to offer: knowledge and resources in exchange for protection. She would emphasize the shared traits between their species: resilience, adaptability, and a thirst for survival. It was the only thing that made sense to her. It was their best chance at surviving, and perhaps even thriving once more. Vira turned to the console and began to type the message, carefully crafting each word. She knew that the humans were a species of action. They didn't waste time with diplomacy or empty promises. They acted when they needed to. And this message had to be more than just a plea for help. It had to be a proposition, one that would interest them, something that would make them see the value of an alliance with the Alvorans. As she typed, she couldn't help but wonder what the humans would think of her people. Would they laugh at them, dismiss them as another weak species from a forgotten corner of the galaxy? Or would they see the potential she saw in them? Would they recognize that despite their apparent weakness, the Alvorans had something to offer, something that the greater galactic powers lacked: the ability to think and learn and adapt without the need for war or domination? Vira finished the message with a deep breath. She felt her pulse quicken as she clicked the send button. The message shot off into deep space, traveling toward Earth at the speed of light. It would take months for the humans to receive it, and she could do nothing but wait in the silence of her laboratory. She stared out at the stars, her mind racing with possibilities. The future of her people now lay in the hands of a race they had never met. As the days passed, Vira continued to monitor the console, obsessively checking for any response. But the silence stretched on. The uncertainty gnawed at her. With every passing moment, the rejection of the galactic powers had been painful, but it had been expected. This was different, though this was a hope, a fragile hope that she had never felt before, the kind of hope that could either lift her people to safety or crush them beneath the weight of their failure. She couldn't afford to dwell on the uncertainty. She had done all she could. Now she just had to wait and hope that the humans would see something in the Alvorans, that the galaxy had failed to see something that would give them the strength they needed to rise from the ashes and survive. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, and still no response came from Earth. Vira sat in her laboratory late into the nights, staring at the empty console, her fingers restless on the keys. She knew the chances were slim. She had sent the message into the vast emptiness of space, with no guarantee that it would ever be seen, much less answered. But the waiting was unbearable. The silence made the air heavy with doubt and fear. She had to remind herself that this was their only hope, their last chance to save their people. As the time passed, Vira began to feel the weight of the Council's growing frustration. Her colleagues were becoming more desperate and impatient, their voices echoing in the halls of the central chamber, demanding answers and solutions. Vira could sense the tension rising. The Council knew the situation was growing worse each day. The Alvoran population was declining, resources were scarce, and the planet was slowly becoming uninhabitable. Without help, they would not survive for much longer. In the midst of this growing tension, Vira was summoned to the council chamber. Her heart sank as she walked through the grand halls toward the meeting room. She knew what the summons meant. The leaders were losing patience with her and her plan, but she refused to believe that there was no chance left. She had to cling to the hope that the humans would respond. Inside the chamber, the leaders sat in a semicircle, their expressions stern and unreadable. Vira stood before them trying to keep her composure. As the head of the council, Althan addressed her with a deep and solemn voice. "Vyra," Althan began, his eyes fixed on her, "your message to the humans has gone unanswered for too long. We have waited, we have hoped, but it is clear now that they will not respond. We cannot afford to waste any more time on this pipe dream." His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, one that betrayed his growing frustration. Vyra felt her chest tighten, but she forced herself to speak with clarity and conviction. "I believe they will respond, Althan. I know the humans. They have faced adversity, and they have survived. They are not like the other civilizations in the galaxy. They do not measure strength by fleets and weapons. They measure it by their resilience." She took a breath, steadying herself. "I am certain they will answer. We just need to give them time." The council members exchanged skeptical looks. Vyra could see the doubt in their eyes, but she refused to back down. She had put everything into this plan, and she couldn't let it fall apart now. Althan sighed and stood up, his tall frame casting a shadow over the room. "Vyra, you are young and your heart is full of hope, but hope alone will not save us." He paused and turned to face the other members of the council. "We cannot continue to wait for something that may never come. We must act now to secure our future before it is too late." The room was silent as the weight of his words hung in the air. Vyra's mind raced, her thoughts scattered in all directions. She could feel the ground slipping out from under her. But then, in the quietness of the moment, a soft chime rang through the room. Everyone turned toward the console. At the far end of the chamber, a small blinking light appeared, signaling an incoming transmission. Vyra's heart skipped a beat as she rushed forward and activated the console, her hands trembling as she saw the message appear on the screen. The transmission was brief, but the words were unmistakable. It was from Earth, a simple line of text flashing on the screen. "We are willing to listen." For a moment, Vyra could hardly believe her eyes. She read the message again, her mind racing, her heart pounding. They had responded. It wasn't a promise, it wasn't an agreement, but it was an answer, and for the first time in what felt like forever, hope surged within her, like a flood of light breaking through the darkness. She turned to the council, her voice trembling but filled with excitement. "They've responded, Althan, they've responded." The council members stared in stunned silence before a murmur of disbelief spread through the room. Althan's eyes widened as he processed the words on the screen. "Well then," he said after a long pause, "it seems you were right, Vyra. They are willing to listen." And with those words, the door to a new possibility had opened, one that could change the fate of the Alvoran people forever. The response from Earth was nothing like what Vyra had expected. It wasn't an offer of help or a formal agreement, but it was a start, a crack in the door where there had been only silence before. Vyra could hardly contain the surge of hope that filled her chest. She knew this was just the beginning, but it was a beginning that could mean everything for her people. As the news spread throughout the Alvoran leadership, the atmosphere in the council room shifted from tense skepticism to cautious optimism. Captain Mara Lawson sat in a small room aboard the diplomatic ship on its way to Alvora. She was surrounded by a team of scientists and diplomats from Earth, each of them eager to learn more about the Alvorans. The message they had received had piqued their curiosity, but it had also sparked a host of questions. Who were these people? What were their intentions? What did they mean by offering knowledge in exchange for protection? The questions were endless, but the most important one remained: how would the humans approach this situation? Mara had been chosen to lead the mission not because she was the most experienced diplomat, but because of her unique ability to think outside the box. Her career had been marked by successfully negotiating peace between warring factions on Earth and in its neighboring colonies. She had a reputation for being able to see beyond the politics and focus on the people themselves. She believed that this was why she had been selected by the Council to be the one to make first contact with the Alvorans. The journey to Alvora took several weeks, and during that time, Mara spent every waking hour preparing for what she might face. She studied everything she could find about the Alvorans, from their history to their biology to their culture. She wanted to understand them before she set foot on their planet. What stood out to her most was their philosophy, their emphasis on knowledge over power, the fact that they had been rejected by the galaxy not because they were weak, but because they had no interest in war or conquest. This was a race that valued intellect and peace above all else, and that intrigued her. When the ship finally arrived at Alvora, Mara stood at the observation window watching the planet grow larger as they descended toward the surface. The purple sky and 2 moons were striking, but there was an underlying sense of fragility about the place. She could feel it in the air, a kind of desperation that came from knowing they were alone in the universe, with no one to rely on but themselves. As the ship touched down, she knew the weight of the task ahead of her was immense, and that the future of both their species could hinge on the success of this mission. The doors of the ship opened with a soft hiss, and the welcoming party was waiting on the other side. Vera stood among them, her tall frame poised and calm, her eyes locked onto Mara's, as the 2 women exchanged a silent understanding of the significance of the moment. This was the first time in history that 2 such different species were meeting, with the possibility of an alliance. Neither side knew what would come of it, but the potential was vast. Mara stepped forward, offering a warm but cautious smile, and extended her hand to Vera. It was a gesture of trust, something neither side had yet to give, but both were willing to try. Vera hesitated for a brief moment before accepting the handshake. The tension that had lingered between the 2 species seemed to dissipate just a little in that small act, and in that moment Mara felt a flicker of hope too. It wasn't much, but it was something. The first words spoken between the humans and the Alvorans were not grand speeches or elaborate introductions, but simple words of acknowledgement, an unspoken promise that they would listen to one another carefully, and that no matter what came next, they would work together to build something better than either could do alone. The future was uncertain, but the steps taken now would be the foundation for what was to come. As they entered the grand hall of Alvora's central city, the atmosphere was one of cautious optimism, both sides unsure of what to expect, but hopeful that this meeting could lead to something more, something meaningful. In a galaxy where rejection and isolation had been their constant companions, the chance to work together was a light in the dark. The air was thick with anticipation as Mara and Vera walked through the grand hall of Alvora. The vast space was lined with shimmering stone pillars that seemed to pulse with a quiet energy. The light from the 2 moons outside filtered in through translucent panels, bathing the room in soft hues of violet and blue. Despite the beauty, there was a lingering sense of uncertainty. Both sides had come to the table, but neither knew what to expect. As they reached a large circular table, the Alvoran leaders took their seats around it, their eyes fixed on the humans with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. The humans sat across from them, exchanging quiet glances with one another. Mara was acutely aware of the weight of the moment. The future of their species was resting on this exchange, and she could feel the pressure building within her. She had led many negotiations in her career, but this was unlike anything she had faced before. The stakes were far higher. Vera sat beside Mara, her hands clasped tightly together on the table, her posture rigid with tension. She knew that this meeting was the turning point for her people. The Alvorans had been rejected by the galaxy for so long, and now here they were face to face with a species that had the potential to help them survive. Mara was quiet but resolute, and there was something about the way she held herself that gave Vera hope that maybe, just maybe, this was the answer they had been searching for. Mara cleared her throat and broke the silence, her voice calm but firm. "We are here because we believe in the possibility of something new, something that has not been seen before in the galaxy." She paused, letting her words settle in. "We've read your message, and we understand the challenges your people face, the way the galaxy has turned its back on you. We believe in your potential, and we are willing to listen." Vera's heart raced as she heard the words spoken aloud for the first time since she had sent the message to Earth. She felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was the first sign of real cooperation that she had seen in so long, and it meant everything to her people. She looked across the table at the other Alvoran leaders and could see that they too were beginning to sense the possibility of a new path forward. "Your offer to share knowledge is valuable," Mara continued, "and we believe that there is much we can learn from you. But we also need to be clear that we are not here to give empty promises. We want to understand how we can help each other, how we can build a future together that is based on trust and mutual respect." Vera nodded slowly. We are not here to deceive you. We know that we cannot offer military power or vast resources, but we can offer our knowledge, our understanding of the universe, our ability to adapt and survive in the harshest of conditions, our culture, values, intellect above all else, and we believe that by combining our strengths with yours, we can forge something that will stand the test of time." The room fell silent as the weight of Vera's words settled on everyone present. It was an offer like no other. The humans were accustomed to alliances built on military power, trade, and influence. But this was different. It was a proposition based on the exchange of wisdom and the belief that two species could find strength not through conquest, but through cooperation. Mara leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving Vera's. "And what do you ask in return?" she said quietly. "What is it that you seek from us?" Vera hesitated for a moment before answering. "Protection and guidance. We need your help to rebuild our society, to ensure that we are not lost to the void of space. We need someone who believes in us enough to help us stand again." The words hung in the air between them like a fragile thread, one that could either bind them together or snap at the slightest misstep. Mara considered the offer carefully and then nodded. "We are willing to help you, but we need to understand more about your people and your history. We need to know that we can trust one another." Vera's heart lifted at the response. It wasn't a complete agreement, but it was the first step towards something real, a partnership based on understanding and shared goals. As they began to discuss the details of their potential alliance, the atmosphere in the room began to shift from caution to collaboration. And for the first time in many years, both sides felt the possibility of a future that could be shaped together. As the days passed, the negotiations between the humans and the Alvorans continued in a flurry of discussions, meetings, and shared learning. Both sides worked tirelessly to understand each other's cultures, histories, and values. Despite the differences that separated them, there was a growing sense that their alliance could offer something unique, something that had never been seen before in the galaxy. Each conversation built upon the last, and slowly the foundations of a new relationship began to form. Mara spent most of her time with Vera, the two of them working late into the night as they mapped out what the future might look like for both species. It was clear that the humans had much to offer the Alvorans in terms of technology and resources, but it was equally clear that the Alvorans had something that humans had never experienced before: an ancient wisdom, a deep understanding of the cosmos, and an intellectual approach to survival and problem-solving that was unlike anything the humans had encountered. One evening, as they sat together in a quiet room within the Alvoran capital, Mara found herself once again marveling at the sheer depth of the Alvoran knowledge. It was unlike anything she had ever seen before. They had mapped the stars long before the humans had even thought to look up at the night sky. They had created complex algorithms to study the natural world and the very fabric of space-time itself. Their civilization had flourished without the need for war or conquest, and yet they had been brought to the brink of extinction by their refusal to bow to the pressure of galactic politics. Vera looked up from a datapad where she was reviewing historical records, her brow furrowed in thought as she spoke. "We have always believed that intellect and knowledge should be the guiding forces of civilization. We have avoided the destructive path of military power because we believe that true strength lies in understanding the universe and adapting to it, not in forcing others to submit to our will." She paused and then added, "But in a galaxy ruled by conflict and power, we have been overlooked." Mara leaned forward, listening intently. She had come to admire Vera's strength and conviction over the course of their discussions. There was a quiet dignity in the way the Alvoran leader spoke of her people's history and struggles, and it made Mara believe even more in the potential of their alliance. "Your people have a strength that we can learn from," Mara said softly. "It's not always about brute force, it's about resilience and adaptability, and that's something humans understand all too well." Vera's eyes met Mara's, and for the first time there was a spark of understanding between them. They both knew that the road ahead would not be easy. It would take time and effort to build trust between their species, but the foundation had been laid, and it was strong enough to withstand whatever challenges might come their way. Back in the council chamber, the mood among the Alvoran leaders had shifted from skepticism to cautious optimism. They had watched the progress of the negotiations with growing interest, And now it seemed that an agreement was within reach. The details were still being hammered out, but the core of the alliance was clear. Both sides were willing to invest in each other's survival and growth. They would share knowledge and resources, and in return the Alvorans would offer protection and a unique perspective on the universe. The council members had begun to discuss the practicalities of the alliance, how they would communicate, how they would share information, and what kind of role each species would play in the ongoing partnership. Vira had taken the lead in these discussions, as she had come to be seen as the bridge between the two worlds. Her voice carried weight in the council, and her determination to see this alliance succeed was infectious. But despite the growing sense of unity, Vira couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were still vulnerable. The galaxy had rejected them once, and there was no guarantee that their newfound alliance with the humans would be enough to protect them from the dangers that lurked beyond the edge of known space. She knew that the humans had their own struggles, and that their attention could shift at any moment. But for now they had forged a connection, and that connection was worth fighting for. As Mara stood to leave the room after another long day of discussions, Vira followed her to the door, and for a moment they simply stood in silence, gazing out at the starry sky beyond. "Thank you, Mara," Vira said quietly, "for believing in us." Mara smiled. "We're in this together, Vira, and together we can face anything." And as they looked out into the night, the future felt uncertain, but it also felt full of possibility. For the first time in many years, both the humans and the Alvorans had found something to believe in, something that could change the fate of both their worlds forever. The days turned into weeks, and the negotiations between the humans and Alvorans deepened as each day passed. It became more apparent that their partnership was growing stronger. The initial uncertainty that had surrounded their alliance was slowly fading, replaced by a shared sense of purpose as the two species worked side by side to explore new possibilities. The exchange of knowledge continued, and the Alvorans began to teach the humans their advanced methods of understanding the universe. Their mathematical models and innovative approaches to space exploration left Mara and her team in awe. The Alvorans had a way of thinking that was fundamentally different from anything they had encountered before. It was a way that emphasized balance and harmony with the cosmos rather than domination and conquest. Mara had never been one to back down from a challenge, but even she was humbled by the scale of what the Alvorans had accomplished without the need for advanced weaponry or war machines. Their civilization had developed technologies that could harness the energy of stars and manipulate gravity itself. Their cities were vast interconnected networks that existed in perfect synergy with their environment. It was a vision of a future that humans had longed for, but had never been able to fully achieve. Vira was constantly by Mira's side, guiding her through the intricacies of Alvoran philosophy and technology. She explained their belief in a collective consciousness that connected every individual to the whole of their species, a way of thinking that allowed them to work together in ways that humans could only begin to imagine. It was a level of unity that Mara found both fascinating and deeply unsettling. There was something alien about it, something that felt beyond her understanding. But there was also beauty in it, and in their simplicity, their refusal to conquer, and instead their insistence on understanding the world around them. As the two species continued to work together, tensions from the outside world began to rise. The greater galactic powers that had once rejected the Alvorans now began to take notice of the growing alliance between the humans and the seemingly weak civilization. From the distant corners of the galaxy, rumors spread of the humans offering protection to the Alvorans, and whispers of a new power beginning to form reached the ears of the galactic elite. The powers that once saw the Alvorans as insignificant now feared their potential, and the human involvement only added to their uncertainty. It wasn't long before the first threat came. The first warning shot fired across the bow. A fleet of ships from a distant galactic empire entered Alvora's system, demanding that the humans cease their support of the Alvorans or face consequences. The message was clear: the galaxy's power structures were not pleased with the idea of a new alliance forming, and they would not allow it to happen without a fight. Vera stood before the council once again, her face grave, as she read the message from the galactic fleet. The words were sharp and threatening, but there was no fear in her eyes. She had been prepared for this moment. The Alvorans had lived on the fringes of galactic politics for centuries. They had survived through cleverness and adaptation, not through brute force, and she was determined that they would not allow their new partnership with the humans to be destroyed so easily. "We knew this would come," Vera said to the council. "We cannot allow ourselves to be intimidated by threats of violence. We have something far more powerful than they realize. We have knowledge. We have the ability to think beyond their limited view of the universe. And we have the humans on our side. They underestimate us, and that will be their downfall." Mara stood beside Vira, her face set in determination. The humans had long been seen as the underdogs in the galaxy, the ones who had fought for survival when all odds were stacked against them. And now they found themselves standing beside the Alvorans, in the same position. They would not back down. They would not let fear rule them. "Let them come," Mara said, her voice steady. "We will face them together and show them that our alliance is not to be broken." The message was sent across the stars, a declaration of unity between the two species, a promise that no threat would break their bond. And as the ships of the Galactic Empire advanced toward Alvor, the humans and Alvorans stood side by side, ready to face the challenge with everything they had. The fleet from the Galactic Empire arrived at Alvor's orbit with a force that rattled the very fabric of space. The ships were massive, their black hulls glistening like predators in the night. The communications channel buzzed with an impatient voice, demanding that the humans cease their support of the Alvorans and leave the system immediately. But Mara was resolute. Her hand was steady on the controls of the human flagship. As she looked across the room at Vera, the two women shared a quiet moment of understanding. They knew this was the moment that would define the future of their alliance and the fate of both their species. "We don't back down," Mara said quietly to Vira, her eyes locked on the view screen. "Not now, not ever." Vira nodded, the weight of her people's survival resting heavily on her shoulders. "We will show them that we are not afraid, we are not weak, and we are not alone." The communication channel opened again. This time, the voice from the Galactic Fleet was more menacing. "This is your final warning. Leave the Alvorans to their fate and return to Earth immediately or face the consequences." Mara stood tall in front of the large screen, her voice steady as she spoke. "We have made our decision. We will not leave. We will stand with the Alvorans, and we will fight for them, if that is what it takes." The silence that followed felt thick with tension. The Galactic Empire had not anticipated this level of resistance, and they were unsure how to respond. The Alvorans were not a threat in terms of military strength, but their alliance with the humans had changed everything. It was a power dynamic the Empire had not accounted for. They had underestimated the resilience of both species, and now they were forced to reconsider their next move. Vira turned to the council and addressed them calmly. "We will not give in to threats or intimidation. We have fought too long to survive. We have worked too hard to reach this point, and we will not allow anyone to take that away from us." She paused, her voice growing stronger. "This is our moment to show the galaxy who we are and what we are capable of." The Alvoran council members nodded their agreement, their faces filled with resolve and unity. They had once been a people who had been rejected and cast aside by the galaxy, but now they were standing tall in the face of adversity. Their alliance with the humans had brought them newfound strength, and they were ready to defend it at any cost. The ships of the Galactic Empire began to close in their weapons systems, charging. The tension in the air grew palpable. But then something unexpected happened. The human fleet moved forward with precision and confidence, a wall of ships that stood side by side with the Alvorans, their formations perfectly aligned. As one, they were no longer two separate entities, but one unified force ready to face the challenge together. Mara's voice rang out over the comms. "All ships hold formation. Do not engage until I give the word." She felt the weight of responsibility, but also the strength of the decision they had made. They were no longer just two species. They were a symbol of resistance against tyranny, a beacon of hope in the face of overwhelming odds. As the enemy ships advanced, the communication channel crackled once more. This time, the voice was different, colder and more dangerous. "You have made a grave mistake, humans. Your defiance will be your undoing. But Mara stood firm, her response calm and unwavering. "We are not afraid, and we will not be intimidated. We fight not just for our survival, but for the future of both our species." And with those words the battle began. The human and Alvoran fleets moved in perfect synchrony, their weapons firing in unison, their resolve unbroken. They fought with the strength of their unity, their combined knowledge and adaptability, proving to be a force greater than the Empire had ever anticipated. The Galactic fleet faltered under the weight of the unexpected resistance. Their arrogance had clouded their judgment, and now they were paying the price. In the end, it wasn't just the strength of their weapons that won the day, it was the strength of their partnership, the unbreakable bond between the humans and the Alvorans, that proved to be their greatest weapon. And as the enemy ships retreated into the void, the galaxy was left with a message, one that would echo across the stars. The Alvorans and the humans were no longer weak and alone. They were strong together, and they would fight for each other, no matter the cost. The victory was not just a military one, it was a victory for the future, a future where species could stand united in the face of adversity and build something better together. The humans and Alvorans had not just survived, they had shown the galaxy the true power of unity.